Today on Straight Talk Africa, a look at building capacity in Africa. What skill sets does Africa need in order to attain its desired economic and developmental goals? We'll talk about the African Capacity Building Foundation and people on the ground applying their skills to make a difference. That's coming up next, right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk Africa live from the Voice of America headquarters in Washington. I'm Vincent Makori in for Shaka Sali. Today we are discussing the African Capacity Building Foundation. Now, human resources development has been identified as the single most important strategic capital for the African continent. Organizations like the African Capacity Building Foundation, the African Union's specialized agency for capacity development, has set up formidable goals to achieve through advanced training and research in science and technology. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
A World Bank survey says Sub-Saharan Africa's growth is projected to reach 3.1% in 2018 and to average 3.6% in 2019 and 2020. This moderate growth upswing nonetheless remains uneven, with considerable variations across countries. But could investment in human resources be the answer? The African University of Science and Technology, Nelson Mandela Research Institute for Excellence on Science and Technology in Africa is leading the way, with a special focus on right areas, according to a top official at the African Capacity Building Foundation.
Science, technology, engineering, mathematics are the areas where Africa has to pay attention in terms of building skills, whether it's to promote agricultural development or to really add value to natural resources, or to be able to really propel the kind of manufacturing jobs that are needed to create a massive number of jobs for young people in the continent.
Created in 2007, the Africa University of Science and Technology is grooming Africa's top young scientists and engineers to make impact in their respective fields.
AUSD is one of those very few institutions that have been created in Africa over the last 20 years to address one of the major challenges for development in Africa, which is the inadequacy of skills in science, engineering, and technology.
The Africa Capacity Foundation supports a number of students at master's and PhD levels. Joy Oyoliwala studied for her master's in computer science, and she's one of the beneficiaries of the program.
I benefited from an ACBF scholarship to study for an MSc in computer science at the African University of Science and Technology. In my spare time, I volunteer in STEM programs, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This is a scheme that's been designed to empower the girl children in learning sciences.
Musibwa Francis, a PhD student, has also benefited from the funding.
I came into AST as an indigent student. I, of course, couldn't have afforded the tuition fee, the cost of schooling in a prestigious institution like this. I've always loved to be an academic with active involvement in research and knowledge transfer, as well as mentoring young Africans. So the funding has been a pivotal point, a turning point for my advancement as a person and as an African who is passionate about education.
Since inception, more than 38 PhD students and 26 young women have completed master's degrees in science and technology, and they are now offering smart solutions to African problems as part of a human resource development program. Analysts say Africa needs improved governance to succeed with its ambition for transformation, but it can only do this by narrowing the huge skills deficit it has in areas such as engineering, agricultural research, and the number of scientists needed to tackle Africa's infrastructure problems. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Well, thanks a lot, Paul, for that report. Now, our guests on Straight Talk Africa, Professor Emmanuel Nnadozie Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. From Nakuru, Kenya, agricultural economist Violet Mogaka joins us live via Skype. And we have the program manager for Boxgirls, Cynthia Coredo Moses, who joins us by phone from Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, thank you. Yes, if you're on the line, I want to go first to Kenya, just make sure we get you quickly. Violet Moraa, if you're in position, you've listened, hopefully, to the packages we just ran about those who have benefited from this program. Tell us, you are one of the beneficiaries. What did you study? How did you get this scholarship? That's for you, Violet Moraa.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, I am one of the beneficiaries for a master's scholarship that was offered by the African Capacity Building Foundation in partnership with the Agricultural Economic Research Consortium. I studied Agriculture and Applied Economics, which is a collaborative program between the University of Nairobi and the University of Pretoria.
Yes, and now we're talking about using the skills to fill a gap. How have you, up to this point, been able to utilize your skills to benefit your community, to benefit your country?
Now, the collaborative Masters in Agriculture and Applied Economics is a very elaborate program that I acquired skills such as research, skills like program management. And from that, I was able to be one of the pioneers that did a research in Jatropha, and that Jatropha is a biodiesel plant that was popular in Kenya, and there were allegations that this plant could replace fuel in Kenya, but those were just allegations. But from the skills that I learned from this program, I was able to go to the field, do a research on the same, and I came up with a policy recommendation that actually saved this country from the problems that it could have created, like land use change, like food insecurity. People were actually displacing cash crops in favor of this plant before even they knew how this plant was able to benefit them. But from the research, I was able to advise the farmers to at least give it some time, or even not displace food crops first. And also I advise the government that they should not just let people acquire this plant without doing any research on the same.
Wow, sounds impressive. Now, let's move a few hours from where you are to Nairobi, where Cynthia is standing by. Cynthia, if you can hear me, share with us also your story, how you got the scholarship and how you have applied the skills that you got through your program.
Firstly, thanks for inviting us to really share our views concerning the growth of African Capacity Building Foundation in trying to impact the life of individuals to also reach out to the community. So I think African Capacity Building Foundation, through the partnership of African Women Development Fund, so that's where we got the support from, we're able to really give support to two of our main key staffs in the organization, in terms of professional development on their leadership skills and how they can translate the learnings that we get in trying to really promote civic education in the community. So I can say that the key benefit that we have gotten through the support of African Capacity Building Foundation was that we were able to really create community movements that could sparkle conversations around advocating for girls and women's rights in education, how to retain girls in school, how we use our unique sport of boxing as a tool to really, as an entry point, to really talk on issues that sometimes are seen as social norms in the community. So through the training and the support, we were able to really understand how can we really disseminate out the evidence that we are trying to really research on, find on issues affecting girls, and what solution are we coming in place with. After our support training, we were also able to create a leadership and mentoring platform whereby whatever that we learned, we've been able to train young women, young professionals, apart from our own institution, but other local youth groups whereby they're run by young women, time, and have the quarterly trainings whereby they are informed on how to organize, how to plan, and how to really go out there and do advocacy at grassroots level to really sparkle change within the community. So that has been one of the greatest effects of change that we have seen after getting the support from African Capacity Building Foundation.
Good. I can tell you that Professor Nnadozie has been maintaining a big smile since the two of you started talking. You must be, you know, your heart warms up when you hear such, Professor. What would you say?
Yes, indeed. I don't know the word to use, speechless, maybe that's the right word. But it's a good feeling. You know, I've been in the teaching profession for a long time, and it's because of my love for making a contribution to human capital development, and this is why I went into the field in the first place. But I had no way of imagining that I could have such an impact as has been described by these two young and very prosperous women. And there are thousands and thousands of them out there who have benefited from either directly from our programs or indirectly from the funding and other support that we give to capacity development programs. Yes. So I am really thrilled, and I'm happy. Yeah. Congratulations to Violet and to Cynthia for the fantastic job they're doing.
Yes. Now, capacity building is such a broad term. If you could, can you, just in a few words, kind of break it down, elaborate a little bit, what do we really mean when you're talking about capacity building?
We just simply try to enable individuals and institutions to be able to change the lives of people, to be able to achieve results.
Yeah, but in this case, you seem to be targeting particular skills, set skills, and you're looking at, from the package we saw, science and technology. Those are the kind of fields that seem to be having a kind of a shortfall across the continent.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. But we need to understand that capacity building is not just simply training or education. Building capacity could be the capacity of human beings, which we call human capacity, or institutions or organizations, or so that they can function well, or even an entire society. So, and from ACBF standpoint, it is our view and our approach to capacity development is a bit all-encompassing, looking at all these dimensions of capacity. The reason being that if you just simply focus on one of them, you may not be able to achieve your results. But coming back to the issue that you mentioned, which is probably the most important, the area of skills, there is no question that what we call human capital is the most important ingredient for economic development. Of course, institutions are important, good governance, and so on and so forth. But if you want to develop, and African countries have come out with Agenda 2063, which mirrors the Agenda 2030, the SDGs. And we as ACBF have asked the fundamental question, does Africa have the critical skills to bring about economic transformation, which is at the center of what they're saying in terms of industrialization and agricultural modernization, and of course advanced manufacturing. And unfortunately, our assessment of the capacity necessary for achieving these important development frameworks is not there, both from an institutional perspective and from a human capacity perspective. Yes. At least they're insufficient as we speak.
Yes. Now, Violet, in terms of what the professor said, that it doesn't have to necessarily be about some training in particular skills, you've attained a level of education. Do you feel that where you are, that would be sufficient for you to make a change, or do you feel like most of even the people you find in the field want more of the academic side of life? They want to acquire more training, more education.
I agree with Professor very much that it's not just about training, but about building your capacity to make change, to change the world. And from that, because just training, it's just theory. But how you can now put this theory into practice to make change is what matters. And that is why we go to the field. You see, now by doing research, you just produce publications, papers. And if these publications the policy recommendations in these publications are not implemented. They just remain paperwork, they just put into shelves, and they cannot change anything. But if you take this policy recommendation, put it out there, implement them, you can be able to make change. For example, I would give my example here. After the study of Jatropha, I established a firm that is called Agicon Consultancy and Capacity Building. And in this, it's a consultancy firm where I do the training part. I tell interns you can use SPSS to get this and these results. But we also go further into, we target young girls and women. We go to schools in partnership with the African Women in Agricultural Research and Development, where we mentor young girls. We actually motivate them to take up science subjects because most of them shun away from these subjects. They think that it is men's affair. But when they see us women taking up these science subjects and succeeding in them, we make a change because they also say, if Violet has done it, I can also make it. And we also build the capacity of women on a personal basis. I train women in one of the slums in Nairobi. It's called Kibra. Because these women, you meet them on the road and they want you to give them handouts. You cannot give them handouts every day, but you can change their lives by telling them how they can acquire their own resources. And we have done a program where I target self-help groups. I tell them, self-help groups, you can be able to acquire loans from the government, like the Women Enterprise Fund. Once you acquire that loan, you don't just go to the restaurant and eat all that money. You invest in a small business. And we have been able to do value addition of peanuts. We make peanut butter. We have acquired a machine for them. And they're actually making change because they're generating their own income from that. I see that as change, not just training. I train them how to do it, but after that, they're able to generate their own income. And it's actually changing their lives. That is what I call capacity building.
Well, that is impressive. And for you, Cynthia, on the same line, you know, we mentioned at the top that there's a big push to equip particularly girls and women with certain skills as the continent works hard to try and build the capacity. Do you get the sense that more girls, more women are embracing some of these fields so that you're able to train them, you're able to equip them so that they can not only benefit themselves but also benefit their communities?
Yeah, I think it's very, very fundamental, and I can echo the words of what has been said. It's very important because if you look at how the world is changing, things are not static. Things are also continuing to change. So, like how we viewed girls taking particular subject is not what we should think of now. It's like creating opportunities. And one of the things that we've made it to be so much critical in terms of us designing solutions, in terms of meeting the needs of girls, is creating the safe space. How is their ownership towards the solution of issues that are really affecting them? So we create the safe space whereby we give girls the opportunity to really choose from themselves, have an opportunity whereby they're able to acquire skills and knowledge that enables them make informed decisions on their day-to-day basis. So I think it's very important. And one of the things that maybe I can echo in that essence is that African Capacity Building Foundation, I think they give a package that is so much practical in a way. So like example from our institution is not only about us like trying to get like the professional training for our staff, but also a part of the support was, hey, can you get this amount of funding to try implement this solution? So the capacity building is not only from the training, but how can you come up with solutions that are from the practical learning that are adaptable to the solution and contents within your region that you are trying to look into. So from this case, even as we involve the girls, because our work is more girl-centered and girl-designed solution. So you find that girls also, from what we learn, the girls also have an opportunity to make mistakes, to fail, but also pick some key learnings from the skills that enables them to see the future for themselves, enable them to make new marks and new roads towards their the leadership pathways.
And of course, we know they say if you educate a girl, if you equip a girl, you're literally taking care of the whole village, aren't you?
Yeah.
Professor Nnadozie, there's the question, you actually did touch on it, that capacity building goes beyond just giving people certain set skills. Let's talk about governance, for example. African countries are replete with terrible leaders at all levels, and people complain that there are inept leaders across the continent. What is being done now that this is also kind of an Africa Union tool to build capacity? What is being done to build the capacity of countries in the area of leadership, management of public resources, and so on and so forth?
Yes, I will begin by saying that I think the whole world is full of terrible leaderships, not just Africa. And I don't believe that African leaders are particularly terrible. I think many of them are quite successful and quite good in terms of promoting development in their respective countries. That's one. Number two is you would see that from the description from these courageous young women, that capacity building is about empowerment. It is really about empowering people, especially young women, as you rightly pointed out, where ACBF focuses special attention, especially in the areas where they are grossly underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And from the program that you saw from the University of Science and Technology in Abuja, Nigeria, you saw that we have been really able to be successful in empowering and educating young men and women in those areas that are the critical skills that are needed for Africa's transformation.
Yeah. But you say well that there's bad leadership across the continent, across the world, not only Africa, but in many countries of Africa. When I speak to young people, the frustration is that the leadership does not create the opportunities, and they can attribute that first to poor leadership. We see a lot of corruption, a lot of mismanagement of public funds, and so on. I mean, how do you kind of help the leadership to manage better and become a tool to generate not only capacity, but also to generate the jobs that will be taken up by these young men and women that you're training, for example, from your university?
Yes, the African Capacity Building Foundation is not just simply focusing on the things that we have discussed, because our mandate includes supporting governments, supporting the private sector, the civil society organizations, and at various levels. In the country level. And so we have had quite a big impact on improving governance across the continent and improving leadership. You're absolutely correct. Without visionary and strong leadership, every other thing that we're saying is not going to materialize. But I think the point I'm making is let's not overgeneralize and let's not brush entire Africa with a broad brush and say it is terrible, there's corruption everywhere, because as we are seeing day in, day out today, Africa is not the only continent that has issues with their leadership. Many other parts of the world where we thought maybe leadership would not be an issue is probably where you're having that happen. But having said that, specifically, what have we done in this past 27 years? We have really paid attention to the issue of promoting good governance through the support of the African Peer Review Mechanism and through specific programs that are geared towards improving financial management, public administration, and also in the areas that require supporting the state capacity and bureaucracy, so that the design of policies can be better. And there will also be implementation of those policies, because that's where the challenge is. As we speak, in a few weeks, a few months, we're going to launch our annual report, we call the African Capacity Report. And this one is focusing on leadership, exactly leadership.
Which is very
key, exactly, to show you our recognition of that. We've gone across the continent to survey what kind of leadership we have. Where do you have good leadership? Where do you not have it? Why do good leaders emerge in some places and they do not emerge in others? What are the issues that has to be done to promote the emergence and sustainability of good leadership across the continent? So I hope I still have a job by the time I launch that report, because we're trying to be as frank as possible.
Exactly.
But just in fairness, if you are aware that in January of this year, the African leaders, for the first time in their history, decided to make fighting corruption the theme for this for
and you know, it's good for it to be a theme.
Exactly.
But people want to see
but the reason
happen.
I'm saying that is it's not an easy thing.
Yeah.
You know, so we need to at least recognize that they have had the courage to come out to decide that corruption is a cancer that has to be dealt with, and that they are deciding to see what they do.
And it's not an easy thing, because in so many cases, actually, the very same people are deep in corruption. They're family members, some of the wealthiest people in their countries, and therefore it is almost sometimes paradoxical that the same people will be saying they're fighting corruption. But let's just go to Kenya, back to first Violet Moraa. In terms of the youth that you come in contact with, Violet, and we know that you really have a passion for the area of agriculture. What do they say? How do they express themselves in terms of their hope for the future? Because I've noticed that quite a number of the young people feel like they don't have a very bright future.
Well, I would say that sometimes it's very discouraging, because listening from the youths, they say that if you don't know someone somewhere, you cannot get anything. So, but I try to motivate them and tell them, try to outshine everyone, so that even if you don't have someone somewhere, at least you'll be visible, because you will have done your best, and someday someone is going to see you, even if that someone does not know you. And most of the youths also think that you need to bribe to get something, but we also try to motivate them, tell them to uphold their integrity. And the other discouraging thing is that there are so many learned people with masters, PhD, but they do not have jobs. So they resort to maybe starting small businesses here and there. And I always encourage them and tell them the future is bright if you work hard.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, and we'll have Professor also chime in on that after. But Cynthia, is that also something you encounter, you know, a sense of apathy from particularly the youth?
Yeah, because if you look in place, like, you know, systems and structures in place, they're sometimes very hard to be changed if maybe policy are looked into in place. But there are some things that we think cannot be done now, but we think that there are some things we can do from our own point of view. So what we always try to do to give the youths, and mostly girls and women, the essence of understanding that they have the power within them to make certain decisions. And how are they doing that? Because it is like a step and a phase that will come, and also like in the future change systems and structures, because they're the next phase of the next systems, the next governance in place. Like in the next 10 years, the girls that are in our program, most of them are 18 and 28. So how are we really helping them to unlearn and learn some of the things, ideologies that will help them really create a future for themselves? So like recently, like in the last 2 months, we had what was called the Girls Summit, and we brought in place almost 500 girls from all our programs to come for a one-day event. And during one of the segment sessions for the event was, we had almost 12 girls who wanted to be the president for the girls. And they had like to really share like how they're going to be the president, what are they going to offer the girls within our context of the organization. And it was a very democratic process, because the girls had to really ask the president the questions, like the potential president, the questions on really what, and at the end of it, they really voted on whom they think as one of the girls can be their president. So putting them in the contents whereby they're given the voice to start understanding how they're supposed to really look into the picture for the future, I think is one of the key steps, because even if we go around and just tell them it's not working, the government is not changing any structures, but now I think it's a way of showing them that it's still dark in the tunnel. We cannot see the light, but how can we start bringing the light now to girls, and seeing the essence that things can really change as they take moves, as they learn, and as they bring in new school of thoughts within themselves. Yeah.
All right, a sense of optimism regardless of the circumstances. Well, you're tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of our discussion in a moment, so don't go away.
This could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
Well, a reminder that we appreciate all of the audience feedback. Straight Talk Africa streams live every Wednesday on Facebook, and you can also watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Now let's look at what's on tap for next week's program.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, world leaders gather in New York for the 2018 United Nations General Assembly. The theme of this year's debate, making the UN relevant to all people, global leadership and shared responsibilities for peaceful, equitable and sustainable societies. Discussing the 73rd session of the UN General Assembly on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Well, today we are discussing capacity building in Africa. Our guests are Professor Emmanuel Nnadozie, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. Agricultural economist Violet Moraa Mogaka joins us live via Skype from Nakuru, Kenya. And the program manager for Boxgirls, Cynthia Coredo Moses, is on the phone with us from Nairobi. Now, Professor, I want to come back to you in studio. Please, I don't want to create the impression that I'm just thinking Africa has the worst leaders, but perhaps what I could say is that many people in Africa complain that African leaders are never held accountable. We don't see the law working. We don't see high-profile leaders who have been involved in corruption being arrested, being taken to task for what they've done. Because of that, people see corruption, especially the young people, see corruption as the reason why their countries are not moving forward. And here is a scenario. An African youth, and I've been to several African countries, will tell you the quickest way to make money in Africa, the quickest way to get rich is to join politics, become a member of parliament, become a senator, become a governor or a president, not become an engineer. So how do you help a person who will tell you, I'll go to school, you will enroll me in your university, I learn engineering, I'll become a doctor, but I can't get a job. How do you inspire such a person to understand the need to build capacity within the continent?
Well, thank God for the Dangotes and the Shreve Masuwas who are billionaires, but they didn't get that from becoming either the president of a country or by looting the treasury. I think, let's not minimize the challenge of youth unemployment in Africa. It is actually, in my view, the greatest problem. The youth bulge, as in Africa, has the youngest population of all the continents. But this demographic, bulge, could become a demographic dividend, or it could be a demographic nightmare.
Yes.
Depends on how well it is managed or how badly it is managed. And also, like I said before, I can cite examples of leadership who are neither corrupt or who are performing well. But also, within that, in the continent, you will see others where there has been leadership failure. So one is not trying to be an apologist, but we need to, my point is, to at least where things are working, we recognize it's working. And we don't treat the 55 African countries as if it's just one country and paint it with a broad brush to say the problem is everywhere, or the problem has the same magnitude when you come to everywhere. Yes, we need to deal with the issue of the youth with extreme level of urgency and seriousness. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing that in many countries. Although I'm seeing it in some countries, I'm not seeing it in many countries. So I agree with you.
So what do you do, for example? And we can take example. I can talk about Nigeria. I can talk about Kenya. I mean, you travel to London, go to anywhere. You find a Nigerian doctors there. The Nigerian politicians or Kenyan politicians don't find those doctors in their countries good enough to treat them. They have to travel to London or to the United States, which means you can't offer a doctor in Nigeria a job that is lucrative enough for him to stay. He has to go elsewhere to make it. So what should come first? Training people in all these skills, or creating an environment and the capacity of a country to absorb these skills? Otherwise, what purpose does it serve to have skills that cannot be absorbed by the country?
I agree. This is one of the issues of the educational challenges facing Africa today. A lot of the educational systems were inherited from the colonial period. And if there's something that experience has shown me that doesn't change easily, it's an educational system. Even the French had many hundreds of years before they even tried to change their system to make it, to modernize it. And so we find the same issues where there are about 3 different problems. One is the concentration of people, undergraduates, especially at the tertiary level, in areas that are not going to promote transformation or economic transformation per se. In the areas of humanities, arts, and so on and so forth. Not because they are not important subjects, but if you say your goal is to develop, you have to provide incentives for this other side to happen.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you a little bit. That's a moot point. It's acceptable right now that across the continent there are too many unnecessary degrees in social sciences. But we have doctors, we have engineers across the continent who will tell you they've been, as they call it, they've been tarmacking, meaning they've been looking for jobs for 5 years, 6 years. They cannot get jobs. So that is my question. That's why I'm asking, what should come first? To give the skills to young men and women, or to create environment and a capacity that can absorb those skills?
In many instances, it is not just a matter of creating opportunities. It's also not just training doctors, but training doctors to become self-employed. You know, because often you can just train doctors and all they know is how to be a doctor, but the education is not accompanied by some sort of training on how you can become self-employed. That's one. Number 2, I agree. The opportunities are not there for them to really practice their something. But let us not just take Africa out of context and then say we're looking at symptoms of a problem that started long ago. You know, there's a saying, if you don't know where the rain started beating you, you probably won't know how to get out of the rain. You know, and but I'm not, the reason I avoid making these kinds of discussions is suddenly somebody will say to me, 50 years after independence, how come you're still talking about some things that happened before? Whether it's the artificial creation of African countries, where practically every country, the number 1 challenge is unity, because they never had unity. So, in fact, they are plunged into wars as a result of that. And the kind of leadership that emerged mirrored what the colonial period gave them. Again, let it not be that I'm simply trying to blame everything on just the historical context. But we cannot just simply ignore it. The reason I'm saying that is this is part of the explanation of the case of Nigeria, where you could have managing the diversity there is so complex that for a real kind of the leadership that you're talking about to be able to make a difference is quite difficult. And the same thing happens in many places. So we need to pay attention to the issue of leadership, because that's from where everything else can emerge, whether it's a change in educational curriculum, whether it is improving the environment, for people to stay and practice their trouble, or to improve the environment for business, for private sector to thrive. So leadership is extremely important, and we need to pay attention on how to, manage the diversity that is creating this kind of problem.
And of course, you said that, we are talking about 54 different countries, and perhaps the leadership will have to think very, kind of deliberately on what sectors to grow, which areas to create the opportunities. Otherwise, you can be educating people in skills that will never be applied in their country.
Let me tell you, I characterize that investing in unemployment. You see what I mean? The little resource you have, you invest it in training people who either are unemployable and not even self-employable. And so that is, the sort of things that we need to address. And ACBF is paying serious attention to that. There's also the element of mindset. One of what we call the colonial hangover. Many African countries do not have even the self-confidence to believe that Africa can self-develop, or they have the capacity to develop themselves. And so there's always this excessive reliance on outside support. And this is one of the things that young women are telling us today, this empowerment dimension of changing the mindset of people to say, listen, you can take your own destiny into your hand. You don't have to wait for government or wait for someone from, give you external assistance for
Professor,
you to do the
I don't know how you help people out of that mindset when now suddenly their hope and the savior of Africa is China, and all these young men are witnessing China coming and taking over every level of infrastructural development, bringing their own people to do the job, and therefore, again, after colonialism, ceding all your freedoms to yet another big economy across the from the other side of the ocean. But just before you can comment on that, let me go back to the ladies in Nairobi and Nakuru, so that we balance this. You know, it's not all about men. If I may come to you, Violet, in terms of, you know, if we talked about the opportunities that exist out there, and for most of the young people, you know, you hear them saying, well, what is the point of me investing so much money, for example, studying in engineering or taking a course that will cost me so much money, when perhaps I could think of something else, perhaps try to join politics? What do you hear?
Come again, please.
Do you get the sense that some think that perhaps, given that politicians or politics seems to be bringing the quick returns, that perhaps that is where most young people are starting to think they should be going?
Actually, that is somehow true, because, for example, there's a guy that we studied with, just had a pass, and I had a second-class upper, and he went straight to politics. In a few months, he was driving a Mercedes-Benz, and he could actually offer me a lift. I have second-class upper and doing my master's, but he had a pass. I hope he's not listening, but he could offer me a lift. So in reality, you could think maybe politics is an easy way out, but when you look at it critically, you enter into politics, there's so much maybe dirty games to play, so it's better to stick to your lane, just work hard. There's always a bright future if you are learned and you have priority for your training.
Indeed. And Cynthia, you kind of first you have embraced boxing, and boxing is a game of is a sport that calls for a lot of resilience and perseverance. Does that seem to be translating to the youth that you deal with, that they, regardless of what's happening in the political sphere, they still feel like they can plow ahead with whatever set of skills, and somehow they'll make it?
Yeah, that's true, because if you look at the rate of retainance of girls in our program, we had one that was 8 years old when she joined the program, and currently she's 19 years, so the 11 years, and she's one of the current leaders, currently receiving stipends, being a coach. So you find that when we use boxing, it's like a metaphor in itself, because it helps people demystify what people think should be or not should be. Like if you look at the boxing itself, people think that it's a main game and it should not be done with girls because it's very violent. But girls learn some of the key skills about communicating, about venting out in a way that helps them to have self-care in terms when there is stress, because all of the youths are very stressed out, like there is nothing coming out from them, there's no opportunities. But how can they use this boxing itself to create something from themselves, to really find the inner thing that is within them? Because I think sometimes we should also blame our own individual self, because I know we need to put everyone accountable for things to be transparent, things to be accountable, like in terms of finances, resources that are national resources. But I think it should start from the individual basis, because there are some things that are just not caught, they are taught, like you teach yourself. So I think with boxing teach one, it's about being disciplined. It's about having your internal integrities, like what do I believe in, what should I hang on, what should I do? Because I think things concerning issues of politics, it all has its good side, but also like has ways a lot in its darkest side. So it's a matter of helping the youth understand, what am I choosing for myself, which is my path. Yes, there are some limitations upon upon my pathway, but what am I choosing for myself? I think that's why we use Boxing, because it's trying to help people really understand, demystify the contents of really what's happening now and where am I supposed to go next? What am I supposed to do? Because even if you really cry yourself onto that situation, sometimes you cannot change overnight, but you have to walk yourself in a hopeful manner for the next step.
Well, thank you. Well, you're tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll continue our discussion in a moment, so don't go away.
If you like today's show, please write and tell us what you think or give us some suggestions. Be sure to tell us what station you're tuned into. Our address, Straight Talk Africa, Voice of America, 330 Independence Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20237 USA. Or send us an email at africatv@voanews.com. Log on to our website at voaafrica.com. Or post your comments on Facebook. Keywords Straight Talk Africa.
Well, Professor Nnadozie, welcome back. And in fact, we wanted us to continue a little bit on that line of conversation about inspiring the young people, giving them the hope even as you train them, even as you work on building capacity. And so we're trying to figure out how do you deal with scenarios that they witness. For example, we've seen protests by even doctors and other professionals across the continent who say they are not paid well, their conditions of work are terrible, and therefore what we've witnessed is brain drain in some of the countries, people just leaving to go to other regions of the world. They have the skills, they have the training, and you're training more people now. So the question becomes, how do you help governments to really appreciate that they not only need to educate young people, but they need to build a capacity themselves to absorb the young people in areas especially of such skills as engineering and science?
Well, we do that by providing advice, number one, in our various kinds of platforms that we have created to be able to engage with African leaders as well as those who are in government, public servants, where we bring up these issues and provide the opportunity for a discussion and sometimes for peer learning. So countries that are doing well will demonstrate what they have done that has been successful, and others will learn from it as well. Yeah. But you know, there has to be willingness to begin with from a country that is ready for that. And our observation is that when you look at across the continent, you see that there are some places where things have been going pretty well, you know, I mean, I can name a few countries, but I guess some would say, but why didn't you name my country? But we can talk about you know, from Mauritius to Rwanda to Botswana to even Ghana is you know, kicking off again. And, you know, go down the road to a few other ones where things are happening, Cape Verde and the rest of them. And so those ones are the ones that give good example of how successfully you can create an environment that is conducive for private investment, for the private sector to thrive, and for job creation to happen. And you can make sure that your education system and your health system would lead to veritable human capital development, and that you are investing in areas where young people can be trained to solve Africa's problems, not just basically, because what you're doing is subsidizing rich countries. Yeah. If you do not invest properly or don't find a way to absorb the people that whom you have really, you know, done that. And the last thing that we do is the analysis. For example, we have just finished a work on Malawi to understand how is a country like Malawi that it can ill afford to lose its doctors, would spend millions of dollars training doctors only for all of them to wind up in Manchester. Is what I'm saying. So
you're actually echoing what I'm
echoing what you're saying.
Yes.
But the point I'm making is it is important to take the good with the bad, and also, like I said, to look at this issue. Look at Africa for example, in 1960, and look at Africa today. One cannot tell me that the significant progress made in the political front, in the economic front, in building roads, in building schools, in training girls, in improving human welfare, in getting Nobel laureates and getting millionaires and getting a lot of people to, like, a lot of us who can be said to have been successful globally, that these are strides that have been made. But in such a short period of time, because this is, they say Rome was not built in a day. But that wasn't. But let me finish that. They say Rome wasn't built in a day, and that's not just an adage. It is because of the length of time it took for Rome to be built. But I'm not trying to say, therefore, that young people shouldn't be in a hurry. No, what I'm saying is that a lot has happened that are very positive, But the point is that has Africa been able to achieve its potential? And I think that's where the whole thing is. And my argument is that the glass is half full. But more could have been done, better things could have happened. But let's also understand that often it takes two to tango. You mentioned about some leaders that have looted their treasury, but where is the money put? Did they put them in their countries? So it takes two to tango. Many of them are hidden somewhere outside.
There's debate about all countries trying to bring money back home, whether it's Nigeria, Kenya, or elsewhere. But in terms of the leadership area, and that's where I'm still curious about how you are practically trying to help. Because if you were talking about creating capacity on the ground, it's also maximizing the economies of scale in every area, in every field. So you look at, for example, different countries, even in the different regions of individual countries, they have certain resources. And to what extent are countries working so hard to make sure they can attract investment in those areas so that they can create jobs and make sure they retain their fellows who they train and pay them well? I mean, you're in the United States, I'm here. I'm able to eat fish from China. I can see, things from so many other countries. But when do you see fish imported from Africa or meat packaged and it's from Africa? And all these are the things that could easily create jobs on the continent and have some, increase the income of Africans. Are they consciously working on those areas? Do you see that?
Yes, I would say they are consciously working on them. And again, it's not every country that's consciously working on them. Unfortunately, some of them have felt so relaxed exporting raw materials without adding value to them, whether it's agricultural products or whether it is minerals or including industrial products that are not yet transformed or some processed or some value added to them. And there's a saying, if you export raw materials, you export your jobs.
Exactly.
You see what I mean? And but this is a double-edged sword. It's something that has two dimensions to it. One is that this is a continuation of what existed when African countries, got independence, and some of them became just simply relaxed. They say, we make a lot of money from exporting oil. Why do we need to have a refinery and produce something else? Until recently, where they began to pay attention to that. But the second thing is also, if you look at the international trading system as well, with all the things that everybody has joined into, a lot of them are preventing these countries from taking advantage of their own, least development status to be able to have some protection to be able to compete in the global economy, especially those that are willing to do that. So these are the issues that are happening. But I'm very happy that practically every country in Africa recognizes that this is a serious problem, and many of them are already making strides. Kenya, that you mentioned, is also thinking about, not thinking, but adding value to the tea that it produces already and exporting it. Even Ghana is getting into the chocolate business. Exactly. And to some extent, there's a whole lot of things going on in South Africa, in Nigeria, in various sectors. But we'll like to see more of this. But the point I'm making is that these are issues that have been realized, and we, continuously do the work necessary to show that it is possible to industrialize based on your own, primary commodities. Because remember, a lot of the theory that existed before, especially from outside, was saying that this international division of labor, that African countries they have the advantage in raw material exports, and so they bought that.
And indeed, I noticed that in 2015, June 13, actually, there was a launching of another fund of about 5 million, which was to support the partnership for skills and applied sciences and engineering, to help mostly sponsor people in PhDs and master's programs in sciences. But before we end it, I want to go back to Kenya and just see if I can get some thoughts, kind of final thoughts from Violet Moraa first, and then we'll go to Cynthia. Violet, so what do you make of all this? What would be your wish if you had the opportunity to speak to African leaders about capacity building on the continent?
Speak for Kenya. If I had the opportunity to meet the leaders, I would tell them to build the infrastructure necessary to help the youths do something to empower themselves, to also avail the resources that are necessary for them to start small businesses, and also to provide platform for the youths to network among themselves. Those who are learned, for example, the engineers, they can be able to network among themselves so that whenever there's an opportunity, everyone gets to know. Because sometimes there is an opportunity, but because I don't have a network, I miss out on the opportunity, and I find out when it's already expired, for example.
All right. Thank you. Let's give a chance also to Cynthia Coredo Moses. Your final thoughts on what you would wish in this field of capacity building.
Maybe if I given a chance to talk to our leaders, mostly breaking it down to our Kenyan leaders, is because the youths are more going to school, they're getting the education. I think creating a work-based learning experience, because if we talk to the youths, most of them say, I don't get the opportunity because I don't have that experience. Where is the experience? How can I get the experience? So I think creating work-based learning experience for youths with the private sector, the non-governmental sectors, just when youths are finishing their colleges, they're finishing their universities, there is like an entry point, like it's another adding advantage from the education, whereby they now translate every learning that they have gotten throughout the years of education. They are put in this other private sector or even small and medium enterprises, whereby they learn and they gain skills, which is more of a reference from the government that even if they now apply for other jobs, they can see that they have a future and an opportunity for the next level of their life, because that sometimes becomes a hindrance for them to really get opportunities,
Thank you. And Professor, your final thoughts, and particularly in what you would wish to see, how you could, if you had a chance, what you would tell African leaders on the area of capacity building.
Well, that this capacity building is probably the missing link between having a fantastic strategy or plan and being able to achieve results on the ground. And it is not just providing education, but also making sure that you are, number one, linking the education that you're providing with the real needs in the society, which we call, making sure that the educational system is paying attention to what is happening. Often that's not the case. That's one. Number two is to pay attention to the technical education dimension, the technical and vocational education areas, which has been neglected, again, based mostly on advice from outside, unfortunately for African countries. And that has to be done because that's where skills come, so that we move from just having knowledge to having skills. But everybody has a role to play. The international community should also look at itself in the mirror to see to what extent it is supporting.
Thank you. I think that is well put. And on that note, thanks to our guest, Professor Emmanuel Nnadozie, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, agricultural economist Violet Moraa Mogaka, and Program Manager for Boxgirls, Cynthia Coredo Moses. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning, it's Daybreak Africa with James Butty. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning in to Straight Talk Africa. And from all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.